One big question is these days, how does collaboration change in the digital age? Not just regarding COVID and staying at home and working from home, but also when it comes to a more hybrid workplace. This is a question that we were asked, and I was asked to give a keynote about it. So I had to prepare a whole new keynote with, of course, some of the stuff you might know if you've seen other keynotes from me. And we asked our client if we could publish the whole keynote. So this time, if you want to know how collaboration could change in the digital age and you want to discuss online, we share the whole keynote here. If you don't know me yet, my name is Christoph Magnussen. I run a company called Blackboard. We are focused on collaboration and communication, everything that makes us work together. And I love technology, and this is why we have this YouTube channel. So we share a lot of these ideas here and discuss them. So subscribe now, and now lean back and enjoy a fully virtual delivered keynote content without any cuts in between. Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Christoph Magnussen. I'm an entrepreneur from Hamburg originally, and for the last 10 years I've been working in the field of collaboration, anything when it comes from digital but also to physical collaboration. This is my profession. But I was thinking about what could I share with you today in terms of experience, and there is something you have to know about me. I'm kind of in between YouTube, podcasts, and sharing a lot of things. So for the last 5 years, I've started to share a lot of these things we've been learning on YouTube and via a podcast that we call On the Way to New Work. And you can imagine this as me and my team filming all the time, interviewing people, getting experiences from Microsoft, Facebook, but also from students, professors, journalists, you name it. Anyone who has to share an experience when it comes to a term that we call new work, which has a lot to do with what we will talk about today. And on that journey, we have now, I would say, more than roughly 400 YouTube videos and around 300 podcasts, so a lot of content. But there was one moment and one specific person we met in the podcast 100 who kind of was a turning point in how we saw what we actually did. He's called Frithjof Bergmann. And Frithjof Bergmann was, back in the 80s, the inventor of the term new work. What you see here is a picture of him back then. He was a philosophy professor. So nothing to do with collaboration as we think of it today, or when you would expect now from me, hybrid work, collaboration environment, whatever. What he did, what you see down there, is the Fisher Body plant. He was asked by the management of Fisher Body, which was a car producer for car bodies, a manufacturer for car bodies, because they had a crisis in the 80s. They had to let go 5,000 people per day. So much more of a crisis as if we've seen it by COVID these days, because this was just one location where this all took place in one city in Flint, Michigan. And people back then didn't have instruments like Kurzarbeit we have in Germany, for example, or a good welfare system. So he had to negotiate kind of life and death, because people, like the workers, didn't have money to pay their bills for food, for example, or for living. So he came there as a philosophy professor and helped to negotiate between the management, the workers, and also the unions. And you think now, what on earth has this to do with collaboration in the digital age? And the term new work that he invented has one thing at the core, which is new work is a work that makes people stronger instead of weaker. And we met Frithjof again at the beginning of last year. It was our last flight before the COVID crisis hit. And he recently just passed away, this May. And this is the last interview that took place. And in this interview, You have to imagine he's sitting in a wheelchair. He was sitting in a wheelchair by then. We took him out of his hospital and brought him to the site where actually he invented the term new work. Here you see him sitting in the car with his special wheelchair and her caregiver, Beverly. So we drove him there, and I was expecting him like to pull in front of this building, this Frithjof body plant building, 40 years after he came up with the term. This is where we sit there. But what happened was that instead of like spending time at this building and the site, we were driving around with him through Flint, and he showed us churches and libraries and more churches. And I was like, okay, this guy is getting old, kind of. Maybe he's, I don't know, mixing things up. But when he shared this experience, something tremendous happened. He said, Christoph, just imagine, you've been a car worker back in the 80s there, and you were expected to talk openly about this crisis for negotiation. They didn't trust this site, this building where they were at all. I needed to find places where we could like have these negotiations and talks. And it came up to my mind because we see the office as a tool. I will share that later why. And I thought this is interesting because he was using a workspace, a physical space, as a communication and collaboration tool, like we have these days with the digital tools. And if you put people in the center of attention of what we do right now, truly, not for the sake of marketing and saying, oh, work-life balance and stuff like that. I'm not saying this is bad, but there is a whole much more below the line than just like having a nice slide about it. But you really have to truly put them in the center of attention, and then you build around it. If you do that, my take is that you will end up with a much more productive and highly collaborative work environment that at the same time won't jeopardize a positive, energizing work environment. And I don't think we have to over-digitize for that, but we have to reshape and reorganize a little bit what we have right now. And I have three experiences I want to share with you to like get to this point, and we can then discuss that later. Number one, we have to think about the tools we work with for collaboration as just tools. It's just tools, nothing more, nothing less. And the easiest way to put it is with a little exercise. So if you look around you, maybe you sit at a desk, put away your laptop, put away your phone for now, and just focus on this exercise, because you can do that with like everyone in your company if you want. Take a pen and paper and draw a line on the pen and paper. And this line, as you see it here, has on the one side asynchronous and on the other side synchronous, which is standing for communication. We're talking about the different communication channels here. And if you think of these two sides, there is a line in the middle which then says fast and slow for how we process it in the brain. So on the top, we process information faster, on the bottom, slower. If you see this matrix here right now, you can imagine that on this matrix there are different like types of communication. Here you have the email, anything in written and reading. You have documents. You go here like to chat tools and stuff like that, so a bit more synchronous. Going over here to video conferencing, which I would claim is the new formal, but not the new normal. You have the phone and you have the office. And I know we talk about digital collaboration here, but if you don't see these things as just tools that help us with communication, we got a problem, because we kind of like bring too much attention to either of the sides. Sometimes it's the office where it says like we have to represent ourselves to the office, or we have a lot of digital tools that we invested in, so we have to use them now. So they're just tools. And the thing is, on the asynchronous side, when it comes to reading and writing, we are much faster in reading, so here, than we are in writing, which is why we usually don't prepare documents in written, because it takes a lot of time. We're kind of lazy. And on here, the talking is much faster than the listening, if it also includes understanding, depending on whoever talks. So this matrix is very simple because it shows you too lazy to prepare in writing. Then we talk too fast. Nobody really understands what we want. And some poor intern has to write some paper notes afterwards to do that. Or another rule we have on this axis is that we know the more emotional the conversation, the more synchronous it needs to be. The more emotional the topic, the more synchronous the communication needs to be. So the office space or meeting in person is very important to actually solve emotional topics. And on this very, very simple matrix, we also know that a video conference, for example, is not a good way to solve problems sometimes, because it's not the informal way of communication that we learned. So this take is very, very important to see these tools in different channels. And you could do the same thing with virtual communication and physical communication, and the hybrid world is somewhere in between. But this shows, these axes show that we have to make decisions in order to use these tools that we have as tools. Which brings me to number 2, which comes from a quote originally from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill said, "We shape our buildings, and thereafter our buildings shape us." And this has been adopted to a quote that you most likely will know if you work in the IT and information sector. It says, "We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us." And the important part of this quote is we shape. That is the part that is important, and which we lack quite often when it comes to digital collaboration. We quite often just take whatever tool we have and start to use it. I mean, I kind of use the example of a smartphone. I guess all of you have a smartphone in the pocket, and most of us have our notifications turned on. And I usually ask, why do you have that? And then people say, yeah, maybe something important happens. And I say, how often do you unlock your phone to look at it? I don't know, 50 times a day. So the average number, I think, is around 80 in my age group, at least. And I have people in my company that work for me in the age group of 20, 25. They're around 150 to 200 times a day. And I usually ask, if you have the task to lead, for example, or to work, why on earth do you need notifications to look on your phone? So this shows how this reshape is important. But I want to give you a more a practical example that shows the difference between a good innovation and poor implementation, which means reshape has been poor. And I give you a physical example and a digital example. The physical example is a quite interesting one, because we know since the 50s that activity-based working is much more innovative and much more productive and much more collaborative. So all good things for a company. The question is, why did we end up in these cubicle deserts? Because back then, a guy called Robert Probst, who worked for Herman Miller Research Group, was researching on the so-called action-based office, activity-based office. It's called Action Office 1. And he invented very innovative things you can see here, with different desks and certain walls around it, and you could stand. It was very inviting, so people could come to your desk and talk to you. So very collaborative, very innovative. So innovative that movies like Space Odyssey 2001 had these desks and furnitures in the movie, far ahead of its time. Why and how on earth did we end up from this idea in a cubicle desert? And this has to do with management interfering in these ideas. Because what Robert Probst said is there are very few important details. And one important detail was that the walls between the cubicles here, or what you could see in the movie, they shouldn't be too high. And they would actually supposed to be in 120-degree angles, which you see here. 120 degrees to be more open and more inviting collaboration. And management came and said, well, I have a great idea. If we put it in 90-degree angles and make the walls a bit higher, we can stuff more people into the space. And this is how we ended up with cubicle deserts. There were stuff also like sound panels on the ceiling and for good acoustics. So a lot of stuff that they already wrote in their research about the Action Office. And it's tremendous to see such a good innovation in a way like this, in a poor implementation way, that we have to respond as managers. And we see the same happening today with workspaces. We are in one of our spaces here, and I have a team that is just dedicated for like how to use the space. What does it do to the people? Is it good for collaboration or not? So this is the physical example. The digital example of we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us is from the end of the 80s or I think early 90s. I think it's 1990. And this example is a video that I stumbled upon a couple of years ago where an entrepreneur that you all know tries to explain an innovation that we all know today, the email. In this video, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, tries to explain the email to a journalist. And if you listen closely to what he says, it's very interesting to compare it to innovation we have today with tools like WhatsApp, Microsoft Teams, Slack. So tools that have built-in group collaboration. Because the way he describes to use the email is a much different way compared to what most people do today with emails. Again, an example of a good innovation and a poor implementation. So Stockholm, please show the video, and you guys at home, listen closely.
I've seen the revolution here with my own eyes, and it's actually larger than the first two. Let me give you some examples. If we want to, if we're going to be doing a special project, let's say with a company, and let's say the company's called what's your
WGBH.
WGBH. We're going to be doing a special project with WGBH, and what we'll do is we'll create a special mailbox, WGBH, and we'll put 20 people on it that are going to be helping on this project. Now, these 20 people will be from all over our company, from marketing, from sales, from engineering, some from manufacturing, maybe some from our Boston office so they can be close by. And if one sends a message to this mailbox, they'll all get it like that, instantly. And if one sends a reply, they'll copy the whole mailbox on it so the rest of the team members get to read the intellectual content going back and forth. And everyone in this mailbox will probably get around 30 mail messages a day. And they'll spend about 20 minutes, 30 minutes reading these and answering these per day. And it'll be like a beehive. Now, this project's very important for our company, and I want to make sure it's getting off right. So I'll put my own name on this mailbox, and I'll see these 30 mail messages fly by, all of the disagreements and the arguments and the thoughts and the decisions. And I can just let it fly by and read it. I can do some background coaching with a few people if I think they're a little off track. I can get right on the network and kibitz if I'd like. And after a month or so, when I know that it's going well, I can take my name off. And so not only is this a way to organize, violating all management and geographic boundaries, it's also a way to manage, where one can see, again, the thoughts and disagreements and decisions of a company fly by a manager in a way that they never could before. And we have seen it reduce the number of meetings we have at least by 50%. We've seen it get far more managers and individual contributors involved in decisions than they ever were before, and we think the quality of the decisions is a lot higher. And we've seen a window for management to look into the process of this organism we call our company in a way that has never before been possible.
So seeing this example, I'm thinking again and again, like, what did we do to this great innovation? And we ended up with a poor implementation, not because of the email, but because of us. And I can tell you from my experience, we do rollouts of Microsoft Teams every day, Slack, and all these different tools every day. And usually we get called up and say, hey, Christoph, we want to get rid of the email. Like, why? And before we do anything with these tools, we have a shadowing, we have a deep dive, and we try to understand how the company ended up in not using the tools they already have in a proper way. And this has to do with reshape the tool. Which brings me to number 3. Why today is a good time to do that? Why now? And it's quite obvious. I mean, my Zen master always says there is only like one day of the year where you can change things, which is today. And the advantage we have is that we all have kind of the same experience when it comes to the pandemic. There are some of us who are very, very privileged to work from home and to be able to use the different tools. Other ones are not as privileged, but we all kind of have an experience related to COVID-19. And this is the reason why I believe there is no better timing to synchronize the way we collaborate these days. And it does not need to be complicated. And as I said, we do not need to over digitize, but what we need to do is to find our experiences, our hacks, our work tools, hacks, and synchronize them with the team. And they can be very, very simple, but very helpful when it comes to these two sides of virtual and physical world. I give you 4 examples of what I want from you right now, because I will give you a small exercise about 2 minutes where you have to brainstorm your best learnings for you personally and the ones related to the team when it comes to working in a hybrid world. Because, as I said, you can have the best tools on the planet. If you don't decide of how you want to shape the tool, they're useless. So like 4 super obvious examples for me personally were: number 1, and we know these from studies, of course we learned it's important to turn off the own image in a video conference. Super simple learning. And maybe you say, well, that's obvious. But from a psychological standpoint, and we have psychologists working in my company, they said, you always look at your own image. I see myself here on a screen on the side, and it's very, very distracting, and I have to focus to look at you guys at the camera. Turning off the image makes it much more easier. The second one was, for us, that we realized using proper cameras, not webcams, but like real DSLR cameras, where like people look in a better way. They are not distorted when it comes to the head. And like we always also told them not to use the artificial backgrounds and stuff like that, because software can solve some of the things, but not everything. The third one was important when it came to trust. We realized that a good mic, which was not a big invest, was leveraging the trust in our people much more, because they were always superior when it came to the voice in a call. Super simple, super obvious. I mean, I have a mic here and not a mic over there because it makes it a better sound. And the last one, I was experimenting myself, and I mentioned it earlier. I realized that video conferencing is the new formal, not the new normal. And I was looking for like, what is a good new informal? And that was the phone. I was using the phone to make direct calls one-on-one to people, because I realized this is what we learned from the old days, calling a friend saying, hey, how are you? And having a quick conversation. So, as I said, the emotional stuff on the synchronous side, for example, like using the phone. I'm running out of time a little bit. I still want to do this exercise with you guys. I give you 2 minutes of time. So let's make it short. 2 minutes of time. Take a pen and paper and brainstorm hands-on stuff where you said, good experience for me, good experience for the team. This is what we will build the good implementation on. 2 minutes starting now. So I know this seems like a simple exercise, but this is what we need to do to synchronize it. And if you look at these 3 parts that I shared with you experience-wise, to understand these things is just tools, not more, but be clear that we have to shape them and use this opportunity we have right now, where we've seen how precious the time in the digital world and the physical world is together to shape collaboration. So this is my take on you, and relating this back to the new work example from the beginning, doing this with having people in mind first, and then just reshaping the tools that are there, we are in a good way to be able to, at the same time, leverage the collaboration part, but also make sure profits will follow. And we will not lose the people on the way by doing this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now I think we're good for questions.
Thank you, Christoph. There's so much interesting stuff to unpack there. Just the tools, and I feel that you've empowered us to be shapers. You've been our Zen master today. I have to confess, I'm one of your YouTube fans. So I know that you are a cinematic Zen master as well. And the sound and visuals are important in your storytelling. Could you just tell us a little about the power of cinematic visuals in this tool setting?
So thank you so much, first of all, for the compliment, because YouTube is my passion. It's not my job, it's my passion. It is very simple. As human beings, we have usually a feeling when we see something, hear something, smell something. And everything that helps us to experience things in a more natural way are very helpful. And it's sometimes quite obvious to think like a camera picture is a camera picture, but it's not. The lens, the camera, everything will kind of give a feeling underlying. And so this is why we experimented with cheap DSLR cameras, but still DSLR cameras, not webcams, and recognized that this investment, which was like below a flight that our advisors usually had in terms of cost, had a huge effect on the remote experience. As you can see here in the picture. And this is how it looks like. So nothing crazy, but a huge effect. And this is why I would always say it's a good way to go and to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for joining us on Link, and we will practice the empowerment that you've given us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. Bye.
Thanks for watching all the way through. I would be interested in your questions and ideas and thoughts, so leave a comment here, and on Discord, of course, join our Discord channel. And here is the whole playlist with other older keynotes. They're not any better or worse just because they're older, but other thoughts. So have a look here. And any questions, let us know. Subscribe. And if you want a keynote for yourself, let me know. There are always good ideas coming up.